The sun was shining brightly over the expensive streets of Beverly Hills, casting long shadows across the pristine pavement. It was one of those afternoons where the sky was a perfect, deep blue, and the air smelled dry and warm. Amidst the sound of luxury engines roaring and expensive tires humming on the asphalt, a rather old and dusty car made its way down the boulevard. It was a vintage Volvo, a car that had seen many decades and carried the marks of a life well lived. It didn't turn heads because of its beauty or its speed, but because it looked so out of place in a world obsessed with the newest and the fastest things. Behind the wheel sat a man who was known to millions of people all over the world. His face was on posters in bedroom walls, and his movies had broken box office records countless times. But right now, in the driver's seat of this old car, he wasn't a movie star. He was just a man enjoying a drive. He wore a simple, dark hoodie that had seen better days. The fabric was soft from being washed so many times, and the cuffs were slightly frayed. On his legs were a pair of worn-out jeans, and on his feet were heavy, scuffed boots that looked like they had hiked more miles than most people drive in a year. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, shielding his face from the California sun. He wasn't driving through this wealthy neighborhood to show off. He didn't have an entourage of security cars following him. He didn't have a loud radio playing. He was just there because he had a simple love for engines and speed. He had spent the last few months working hard on a difficult film set, memorizing lines, and doing dangerous stunts. Now, he had a rare day off, and he wanted to treat himself. He wasn't looking for jewelry or fancy suits. He wanted to look at a machine. He had his heart set on seeing a specific car, a beautiful piece of engineering that he had been thinking about for a long time. As he approached the exclusive car dealership, his grip on the steering wheel tightened a little. He knew that places like this could be intimidating. The building ahead looked less like a shop and more like a modern art museum. It had floor-to-ceiling glass walls that sparkled in the sunlight, and inside, he could see the sleek, curved shapes of supercars gleaming under spotlights. It was a temple to speed and luxury. The man in the Volvo didn't want to park right in front of the main entrance. He knew that his old car would stick out like a sore thumb next to the brand new Porsches and Lamborghinis that were usually parked there. He also knew that if people saw his face, the calm afternoon would turn into a chaotic selfie session. He just wanted to be left alone to look at the cars. So, he guided his old Volvo to the very back of the large lot. He found a quiet spot in the shade, away from the flashy entrance, and parked the car carefully. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, taking a deep breath. He adjusted his cap in the rearview mirror, making sure his face was hidden. He checked his reflection. He didn't look like a millionaire. He looked like a guy who might be on his way to a garage sale or a hike in the mountains. He smiled at himself. He liked that he could still blend in when he wanted to. He liked that the world didn't always know who he was. Turning off the engine, the car fell silent. He opened the heavy door, and it creaked slightly, a sound that echoed in the quiet back lot. He stepped out, placing his boots on the hot pavement. He stretched his arms above his head, feeling his muscles pop after the long drive. He didn't have a watch on his wrist, and he didn't carry a fancy leather wallet. He just had his keys in his pocket and a calm, relaxed energy about him. He began to walk toward the dealership building. The walk was longer than he expected, giving him time to take in the atmosphere. The air smelled of expensive leather and hot rubber. As he got closer to the main showroom, he could hear the low hum of conversations and the soft click of dress shoes on polished floors. He passed rows of incredibly expensive cars, painted in bright reds, yellows, and silvers. He admired them as he walked, appreciating the design and the power they represented, but he didn't touch them. He kept his hands in his pockets, moving with a quiet confidence. When he finally reached the main glass entrance, he stopped. Through the glass, he could see the sales team. They were dressed in sharp, tailored suits. They wore expensive watches and had perfectly styled hair. They were walking around with cups of coffee in their hands, looking confident and important. They were laughing with customers who looked just as polished as they did. It was a world of shiny surfaces and perfect appearances. The man in the hoodie looked down at his own clothes. He knew he didn't fit the picture of someone who was ready to drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on a car. But he also knew that money doesn't always dress in a suit. He had earned his money through years of hard work, dedication, and passion. He believed that if you were going to spend a fortune on a machine, the machine should speak for itself, and the person buying it shouldn't have to put on a costume to be respected. He took another deep breath, pushed the heavy glass door open, and stepped inside the cool, air-conditioned showroom. The atmosphere changed instantly. The air smelled like new car interiors and high-end cologne. The carpet was so thick it felt like walking on a cloud. The lighting was designed to make the cars look like they were glowing. As he walked further into the room, he felt a few pairs of eyes turn toward him. The conversation seemed to dip in volume for just a split second. He was a stranger in a strange land, a rugged figure in a room full of polish. He didn't let it bother him. He kept his head up, his eyes scanning the room for the specific car he had come to see. He walked with a relaxed stride, his hands still tucked deep into his pockets, looking very much like a man who belonged on a movie set, but not in the way the salespeople assumed. He was just a few feet away from a bright red Ferrari, admiring the curves of the bodywork, completely unaware of the judgment that was silently forming in the minds of the staff watching him. He was just Keanu, a guy who loved cars, hoping to have a good conversation about horsepower and torque. But the peaceful afternoon was about to take a turn, as the gap between his appearance and his reality was about to clash with the superficial values of the luxury car world. Inside the showroom, the air was cool and smelled of rich leather and expensive wax. It was the kind of place where silence felt heavy, broken only by the soft murmur of serious conversations and the click of polished shoes on the marble floor. The man in the faded hoodie walked slowly, taking his time. He wasn't there to rush. He was there to admire the machines. He moved past a row of sleek, silver cars that looked like they were made for space travel, but his eyes were searching for something specific. He was looking for a splash of red. Finally, he saw it. Sitting in the center of the room, bathed in its own special spotlight, was a stunning red Ferrari. It was low to the ground, wide, and aggressive. The paint job was so deep and shiny that it looked like a liquid mirror. Most people saw a price tag or a status symbol when they looked at a car like that, but he saw something different. He saw engineering. He saw art. He appreciated the curve of the wheel arches and the way the engine was positioned perfectly in the middle to give the car perfect balance. He stepped closer to the red car, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't touch the paint, he knew better than that. He just wanted to look. He leaned in slightly, his eyes tracing the lines of the bodywork. A small, genuine smile appeared on his face, hidden mostly by his cap, but visible in the crinkle of his eyes. For a moment, he forgot about the noisy world outside. He forgot about being famous. He was just a guy who loved cars, standing in front of a masterpiece. While he was lost in the beauty of the machine, he was being watched. From across the room, standing near a large glass desk, a tall salesman was observing him. This salesman was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His shirt was crisp and white, and his tie was perfectly knotted. He spent his days selling cars to celebrities, business moguls, and lottery winners. He thought he was an expert at reading people. He thought he could tell exactly how much money was in a person's bank account just by looking at their shoes. The salesman looked at the man in the hoodie. He saw the scuffed boots. He saw the worn-out jeans. He saw the simple cap pulled low. In the salesman's mind, this person didn't belong here. He wasn't a customer, he was probably just a tourist who wandered in off the street to take selfies, or maybe someone looking for a bathroom. The salesman felt a familiar wave of annoyance. He didn't have time for people who were just window shopping. He wanted to make a sale, and he didn't think this guy could afford a hubcap, let alone a Ferrari. Deciding to intervene, the salesman smoothed his jacket and put on a fake, professional smile. He walked across the showroom floor with a confident stride, his footsteps echoing on the hard floor. He didn't walk over to welcome the man, he walked over to guard the merchandise. He reached the red car just as the visitor was admiring the exhaust pipes. "Nice car, isn't it?" the salesman said. His voice was loud and carried across the quiet room. The man in the hoodie looked up, surprised. He nodded politely. "Yes, it is. The lines are incredible. I really appreciate the work they did on the rear diffuser this year." The salesman paused. He hadn't expected a technical answer. He expected a "wow, shiny" or a "how much does this cost," but he quickly brushed it off. He let out a small, dismissive chuckle. "It certainly is eye-catching. It's one of our most exclusive models. The price is quite exclusive, too." He put a heavy emphasis on the word price, hoping to give the man a hint. He looked the visitor up and down, making no effort to hide his judgment. He crossed his arms over his chest, creating a physical barrier between the man and the car. "It handles beautifully," the man continued, ignoring the hint. "I've read that they adjusted the suspension for better cornering at high speeds. Is that true on this specific model?" The salesman laughed again, but this time it was sharper. There was no warmth in it. He looked at the man like he was a naive child asking if he could drive a rocket ship to the moon. "Look," the salesman said, dropping the polite act entirely. His tone became condescending, like he was talking to someone who didn't understand how the world worked. "This isn't a video game. This is a serious machine for serious collectors. It requires a lot of, let's say, financial commitment." The man in the hoodie blinked. He tilted his head slightly, trying to understand why the salesman was being so strange. "I understand," he said softly. "I'm just asking about the handling." The salesman sighed, acting as if he was wasting his precious time. He took a step closer, trying to intimidate the visitor with his height and his expensive suit. "I think you might be in the wrong place," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We don't sell toy cars here. And to be honest, we have a strict policy about loitering. We can't have just anyone touching the merchandise." The visitor straightened up. He didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He just stood there with a quiet dignity that made the salesman feel slightly uncomfortable, though he didn't show it. "I wasn't touching it," the visitor said calmly. "I was just looking." "Well, looking is fine," the salesman snapped, "but don't get your hopes up. Cars like this are for people who have worked hard for their success. People who dress the part." He gestured vaguely at the man's worn-out hoodie and dirty jeans. "We get a lot of people coming in here pretending they can afford these things. It's tiring for the real customers. Why don't you head over to the used car lot down the street? I think they have a few nice sedans that might be more in your budget. The silence around them grew heavy. A few other customers in the showroom stopped talking and looked over. They could hear the salesman's rude tone. They saw the way he was treating a man who had done nothing wrong. It was an awkward, uncomfortable scene. The salesman, however, didn't care. He felt powerful. He felt like he was protecting his territory. He truly believed he was doing the right thing by chasing away someone who clearly didn't belong in his world of luxury. Just a word of advice, the salesman added, smirking as he turned to walk away. If you want to be taken seriously in this town, maybe buy a suit that fits before you try to buy a supercar. He left the man standing there by the red Ferrari. The salesman walked back to his desk, feeling pleased with himself. He thought he had taught a lesson to someone dreaming too big. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He didn't know that the man in the faded hoodie wasn't just a random person off the street. He didn't know that he had just mocked a man who was richer and more respected than he could ever imagine. He didn't know that the man standing quietly by the car was Keanu Reeves. All he knew was that he thought he had won, but the game was far from over. The salesman walked back toward his desk with a smug look on his face, believing that he had successfully handled a difficult situation. He sat down, picked up a pen, and began to tap it rhythmically against the desk, expecting to hear the sound of the door opening and closing as the man in the hoodie left. But the showroom remained quiet. The salesman waited a few seconds, then turned his chair slightly to look back. To his surprise, the man hadn't moved. He was still standing by the red Ferrari, looking completely unbothered by the rude comments. He was leaning in slightly, examining the intricate details of the brake calipers with genuine fascination. This confused the salesman. Usually, when he embarrassed people like that, they would shuffle away in shame. But this man acted as if he hadn't heard the insults at all. The salesman felt a flicker of irritation. He hated being ignored. He felt that he hadn't made his point clearly enough. He stood up again, smoothing his expensive tie, and marched back across the showroom floor. This time, his footsteps were heavier and angrier. "I thought I told you," the salesman began, his voice sharper than before, "that this isn't a place for sightseeing." The man in the hoodie straightened up and turned to face him. His expression was calm, his eyes hidden behind the dark shade of his cap. He didn't look angry or embarrassed. He just looked focused. "I'm not sightseeing," the man said softly. "I am genuinely interested in the performance specifications of this vehicle. I was actually wondering about the gear ratios in the lower gears. Is it true that the third gear is optimized for tight cornering on tracks?" The salesman stared at him for a moment. He was stunned. He didn't expect a guy in old clothes to ask such a specific and intelligent question about engineering. The salesman himself didn't even know the exact answer to that without looking at the brochure. Panic and embarrassment pricked at his ego, but instead of admitting he didn't know, he reacted with more arrogance. He let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed off the glass walls. "Gear ratios, track cornering." The salesman shook his head, making a tisk-tisk sound with his tongue. "Listen, pal. You can't just repeat words you read in a car magazine and expect to sound like an expert. It's embarrassing. You probably don't even know how a clutch works." The man in the hoodie didn't flinch. He stood his ground. "I have driven manual transmission cars for most of my life," he said, his voice steady. "I prefer the control. I just want to know if this specific model handles well during aggressive acceleration." Aggressive acceleration. The salesman was practically sneering now. He looked around to see if anyone was watching this comedy show. He leaned in close, invading the personal space of the visitor, wanting to intimidate him. You think you can handle a car like this? Do you have any idea what this kind of power does to a person who doesn't know how to drive? It eats people like you for breakfast. You wouldn't last 10 seconds on a track in a machine like this. You'd wrap it around a tree before you got out of the parking lot. The visitor took a small step back, not out of fear, but to give himself some space. He kept his hands in his pockets, maintaining a relaxed posture despite the verbal attack. I understand the risks, he said quietly. I've done my share of high-speed driving. That's why I'm asking about the technical specs. The salesman lost his patience. He decided to stop being subtle. He was going to crush this dreamer with the hard reality of numbers. He wanted to see the look on this man's face when he realized he couldn't afford even the hubcaps of this car. Okay, you want to talk specs? Let's talk about the most important spec, the salesman said, his voice dripping with condescension. He spoke slowly, enunciating every word, as if he were speaking to a small child. The price. This car costs more than most people earn in a decade. And that's just the sticker price. You know about insurance, right? For a car like this, the insurance alone is astronomical. They don't give cheap policies to guys who dress like, well, like you. He gestured dismissively at the man's worn boots and faded hoodie. And then there's the credit check. When you walk in here looking like you just rolled out of bed, banks aren't exactly lining up to give you a loan. You'd need a flawless credit score, a massive down payment, and a provable income that hits 7 figures a year. Do you fit that picture? The salesman paused, letting the question hang in the air like a cloud of smoke. I didn't think so. The visitor stood there, listening to the lecture. He didn't pull out a wad of cash. He didn't flash a black card. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He simply listened. There was a sadness in his eyes, a realization that kindness and simple curiosity were rare commodities in a place like this. He felt sorry for the salesman. He could sense the insecurity behind the man's expensive suit. He knew that the salesman was trapped in a world where people were judged only by the price of their clothes, not the content of their character. I see, the man in the hoodie said finally. So, you base your service entirely on assumptions about a person's appearance before you even verify their financial status. The salesman scoffed. I don't need to verify anything. I have eyes. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know a customer when I see one, and I know a tire kicker when I see one. You're wasting my time, and you're wasting air in this showroom. The tension in the room was now thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't just the salesman and the visitor anymore. A wealthy couple, who were looking at a yellow car nearby, had stopped their conversation. The sales manager, a man with gray hair and glasses, had stepped out of his office and was watching the interaction with a frown. The other salespeople were whispering behind their hands. Everyone felt the awkwardness, but the arrogant salesman was too full of himself to notice. He thought he was being the hero of the store, protecting the inventory from the riffraff. I'll tell you what, the salesman said, a cruel smirk returning to his face. Since you seem so interested in the car, why don't you go home, check your bank account, and if you actually have any money left over after paying your rent, maybe you can buy a nice poster of this car. It will look great on your wall, and it costs about $20. That seems much more in your budget, doesn't it? He laughed at his own joke, expecting the man to look defeated. But the man just sighed, a deep, weary sound. It was the sigh of someone who was tired of the way the world treated people. "That's unfortunate," the man said, his voice barely a whisper. "I really was hoping to buy a car today. I like to support businesses that value their craft." The salesman rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. "Sure you were, buddy, sure you were. Now, please, leave. You're making the place look messy." The man stood there for one more second, looking at the beautiful red Ferrari one last time. It really was a magnificent machine. But the magic of the moment was gone. The car was no longer a dream, it was just a cold object in a room full of cold people. He shook his head slightly, a slow, sad movement, and turned to walk away. The salesman watched him go, feeling a rush of victory. He had protected the fortress. He had kept the dreamer out. As the visitor walked toward the glass doors, the atmosphere in the showroom shifted. It wasn't a victory for the salesman, it was the calm before the storm. The salesman didn't realize it yet, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had judged a book by its cover, and he was about to find out that the pages inside told a very different story than the one he had imagined. The truth was standing right there, walking out the door, and it was only a matter of seconds before the entire world came crashing down around the salesman's ears. As the glass doors slid shut behind the man in the hoodie, a heavy, awkward silence settled over the showroom. The salesman stood there with his hands on his hips, wearing a satisfied smirk, looking around at the other customers as if expecting applause for protecting the store from an intruder. But no one clapped. No one smiled. In fact, the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The air felt thick with tension. The wealthy couple who had been looking at the yellow car nearby were no longer looking at the vehicle, they were staring at the glass doors with their mouths slightly open. They were looking at the retreating figure of the man walking back toward the parking lot. The salesman didn't understand the sudden shift. He thought they were just impressed by his authority. He smoothed his hair and walked back toward his desk, intending to grab his coffee cup. As he passed the couple, he heard the man whisper something to his wife. "Honey," the man said, his voice shaking slightly with disbelief. "Do you think that was really him?" The salesman stopped mid-step. He turned his head, a look of annoyance on his face. "Excuse me, were you speaking to me?" The customer, a man wearing a very expensive watch and a tailored jacket, looked at the salesman with a mix of pity and shock. He pointed a trembling finger toward the glass doors. "That man, the one you just kicked out? I think that was Keanu Reeves?" The salesman laughed out loud. It was a loud, bark-like sound that was meant to show how ridiculous the idea was. "Keanu Reeves, the movie star? Don't be absurd. Why would a movie star be wearing a ratty hoodie and driving a beat-up Volvo? He probably gets paid millions to wear suits on the red carpet. That guy was just a nobody looking for attention." "No," the customer insisted, his voice getting louder. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, his fingers flying across the screen. "I saw his profile when he turned. And that Volvo. Keanu Reeves is famous for driving that exact same vintage car. He loves it. He refuses to get rid of it." The salesman felt a tiny, cold knot form in the pit of his stomach. He looked back at the glass doors. The man was far away now, a small figure walking through the heat waves rising off the asphalt. But then, he saw the man reach his car. The salesman squinted his eyes. It was a vintage Volvo station wagon. It was old, dusty, and distinct. It looked exactly like the car he had seen in magazines and celebrity gossip sites, the car the internet loved to talk about. Suddenly, the sales manager, who had been watching silently from his office, came rushing out. He was holding a tablet in his hand, his face pale white. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He walked straight past the salesman and stood next to the customer, looking at the phone screen. "Oh no," the manager whispered. "Oh no, no, no." The salesman's smirk vanished. He walked over to them, his legs feeling suddenly heavy. "What is it? What's going on?" The manager looked up, his eyes wide with horror. He didn't yell. His voice was barely a whisper. "That was Keanu Reeves? He just bought a house nearby. He's been looking for a new car. I heard rumors he might come in today." The salesman felt the blood drain from his face. His heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against his ribs so hard he could hear it in his ears. "Keanu Reeves," he stammered. "The guy from The Matrix, John Wick." "Yes," the customer said, turning his phone screen around to show a picture of the actor. In the photo, Keanu was smiling, wearing a hoodie and jeans that looked exactly like the ones the visitor had been wearing. "You just kicked Keanu Reeves out of the store. You insulted him. You told him to go buy a poster." The room started to spin. The salesman looked at the photo, then looked out the window again. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying speed. The quiet demeanor. The lack of an entourage. The humility. The technical questions about the car's handling, questions someone who actually drove fast cars would ask. The man hadn't been pretending, he knew exactly what he was talking about. He was a genuine car enthusiast. And the salesman had treated him like dirt. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just lost a sale, he had potentially destroyed the reputation of the dealership. Keanu Reeves was one of the most beloved actors in the world. He was known as the internet's boyfriend because he was so kind, humble, and down to earth. And this salesman had mocked him for being down to earth. He had made fun of his clothes, the very clothes that made him relatable to millions of people. "Did you hear what he said about the insurance?" the salesman whispered, his voice trembling. "I told him he couldn't afford it." The manager put a hand over his mouth, shaking his head in disbelief. "He has enough money to buy this entire franchise. Cash. And you lectured him about credit scores." The other salespeople in the showroom had stopped working entirely. They were all gathered by the windows, watching the man in the parking lot. The gossip was spreading like wildfire. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's really him. I can't believe he did that. He's going to get fired for sure." Panic began to set in. The salesman's mind raced. He had to fix this. He had to apologize. Maybe he could still save the sale. Maybe if he went out there right now and groveled, apologized, explained that it was all a big misunderstanding, surely Keanu would understand. He was a nice guy, right? That was what everyone said. He was forgiving. "I have to go out there," the salesman said, his voice cracking. He started toward the door, tripping slightly over his own feet in his haste. "I don't think that's a good idea," the manager said coldly, blocking his path. "You've done enough damage. If you go out there now, you'll just make it worse." But the salesman wasn't listening. He was driven by pure terror now. The thought of losing his job, the thought of the story hitting the news headlines, "Ferrari dealer insults Keanu Reeves." It was a nightmare scenario. He could already see the angry comments on social media. He could see the protests outside the store. He pushed past the manager, his hands sweating profusely. He burst through the glass doors and into the hot afternoon sun. The air outside felt suffocating. He could see the Volvo at the back of the lot. The man was just opening the driver's side door. "Wait!" the salesman screamed, his voice cracking and echoing unnaturally loud across the lot. He ran as fast as he could in his dress shoes, his lungs burning. "Sir! Wait! Please!" He was running, but inside, he felt small. He felt like the scum of the earth. He was chasing a ghost, chasing a mistake he couldn't take back. The contrast was painfully clear. Here he was, a man in a $1,000 suit, running desperately and sweating, chasing after a man in old clothes who possessed more class, wealth, and dignity than he would ever know. The gap between them was not about money, it was about character. And for the first time in his life, the salesman knew he was on the wrong side of that gap. He watched as the man paused, his hand on the car door, and slowly turned around. The realization was complete. There was no hiding now. The judgment day had arrived, and it was wearing a baseball cap. The salesman ran across the scorching hot asphalt, his expensive shoe slipping slightly as he tried to slow down near the old Volvo. He was out of breath, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might jump right out of his chest. The heat of the sun was nothing compared to the burning heat of shame on his face. He reached the car just as the man was about to step inside. "Wait, please!" the salesman gasped, bending over and clutching his knees as he tried to suck in air. "Sir! Wait a second!" The man paused, 1 foot inside the car. He turned his head slowly, looking at the sweating, disheveled salesman. He didn't look angry. He didn't look amused. He just looked tired. The salesman straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his face twisted into a desperate panic. I made a terrible mistake," the salesman stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "I didn't realize who you were. Honestly, I had no idea. If I had known, I never would have said those things. Please, you have to believe me." The man leaned against the doorframe of his old car, crossing his arms. He was silent for a moment, letting the salesman squirm in the awkward silence. The distant sound of city traffic seemed to grow louder. "You didn't realize who I was," the man repeated. His voice was calm, almost a whisper. "Does it matter would you have treated a regular person with that much disrespect, or is it only a problem because you found out I'm famous?" The salesman froze. The question hit him like a bucket of ice water. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He wanted to say that of course it mattered, that he respected all customers, but they both knew it was a lie. He had judged the man solely on his clothes, and he had been cruel about it. I can give you the car," the salesman blurted out, changing the subject. "I can give you a massive discount. Employee pricing. No, better than that. I'll talk to the manager. We can prepare it right now. We can have it ready for you by tomorrow. Please, just come back inside." He was begging now. He wasn't thinking about the sale anymore, he was thinking about his job, his reputation, and the terrifying thought of everyone knowing that he had chased away a celebrity. He was terrified that his boss would fire him on the spot. The man in the hoodie shook his head very slowly. A sad smile touched his lips. "You don't have to do that," he said softly. "I don't want a discount. And I don't want the car." "But why?" the salesman cried out, his voice cracking. "It's an amazing machine. You said you loved it? You wanted it?" "I did love the car," the man agreed. "But I don't like the way business is done here. You asked me if I could afford the insurance. You made fun of my clothes. You told me to buy a poster. He paused, looking the salesman directly in the eyes. I was excited to come here. I wanted to buy something nice to celebrate my hard work. But you took the joy out of it. You made me feel small in a room full of big, expensive toys. The salesman felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to argue, to explain that he was just doing his job, but he couldn't. For the first time, he saw the situation through the customer's eyes. He saw a man who just wanted to be treated like a human being. I can pay, the man continued. I have the money. That was never the issue. The issue is respect. You looked at me and decided I wasn't worth your time. And that tells me everything I need to know about this dealership. It was just a joke. The salesman tried one last time, his voice desperate. A bad joke. I was under so much stress today, I wasn't thinking straight. Please, forgive me. The man pushed himself away from the car and stood up straight. He towered over the salesman slightly. He reached into his pocket, and for a second, the salesman flinched, thinking he might pull out a wallet to prove him wrong. But instead, the man just adjusted his keys in his hand. Jokes are supposed to be funny, the man said gently. That was just mean. But it's okay. I'm not angry. I just want to go home. He turned and sat down in the driver's seat of the old Volvo. The interior was simple and worn, a stark contrast to the pristine luxury of the showroom. Wait. The salesman said again, reaching out but stopping his hand just before it touched the car door. He felt helpless. Can I at least get an autograph for my boss to show him I tried? The man looked at him over his shoulder. There was a long pause. The salesman held his breath, hoping for anything that could save him from this humiliation. Have a good day, the man said simply. He closed the door. It clicked shut with a heavy, solid sound. The salesman stood there, his hand hovering in the air, feeling completely empty. He watched through the dusty windshield as the man put on his seat belt. The engine of the Volvo sputtered to life. It wasn't a smooth, silent purr like the Ferrari, but a rough, mechanical roar that had character. The salesman backed away slowly as the car began to move. He watched as the old Volvo drove past the rows of shiny, unused supercars. It looked out of place, but as it drove away, it somehow looked more real than anything else in the lot. The car didn't turn back. It just drove toward the exit, merging onto the busy street and disappearing into the flow of traffic. The salesman was left standing alone in the heat. He looked down at his expensive suit. He looked at his polished shoes. He looked at the reflection of the dealership in the glass windows. It looked beautiful, expensive, and perfect. But it felt hollow. Slowly, he began the long walk back to the showroom. With every step, he felt the weight of the eyes of his co-workers. Through the glass, he could see them watching him. Some were shaking their heads. Some were whispering. The manager was standing by the door, his face red with anger, waiting for him to return. The salesman knew he was going to get yelled at. He might even get fired. But as he walked, he realized the worst punishment wasn't losing his job. The worst punishment was the memory of how he had behaved. He had treated a good person like garbage, and for what to feel powerful for 5 minutes he pushed the door open and stepped back into the air-conditioned room. The silence was deafening. No one greeted him. No one offered him water. He walked past the red Ferrari he had guarded so fiercely. It was still beautiful, still fast, still incredibly expensive. But as the salesman looked at it now, It didn't look like a prize. It looked like a hollow shell. He realized that day that true class isn't about the car you drive or the suit you wear. It's about how you treat people when you think no one is watching. He went to his desk, sat down, and put his head in his hands. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot somewhere in the city. A man in a hoodie was driving his old car, happy and free, while the man in the fancy suit sat trapped in a prison of his own making. The Ferrari was still there, waiting for a buyer, but the man who almost bought it was gone forever.